Welcome to Diamond's Edge Live. My name is Greg Diamond, editor of Stansberry Research at 10 Stock Trader. And some important things to share with you this week. Basically, not to be short this market, okay? I will go over what the bullish setups look like, what we can look for going forward in terms of positive technical indicators, positive technical setups to trade within this uptrend. We'll touch on, a worst case scenario that pretty much has lowered the possibility of happening after what we saw earlier this week with the trade deal. But it's always helpful to know exactly where you're wrong, or at least how I'll show you is what could happen. Okay, again, very, very low probability, but something that is at least in the back of your mind about what it is possible. But even if that does happen, we're still looking at a very bullish market that I wouldn't get too short, okay? And then at the end, I'll go over a very aggressive target I have for Bitcoin and what that could look like, okay? So let's jump into it. Let me share my screen here. And what I want to start with first is we will look at the S&P 500, okay? And this is basic Elliott wave, all right? And we had this corrective move, from February down into early April, okay. And then what I was looking at in terms of the bullish setup, we started trading from the long side amidst all this volatility, okay. And then we started breaking out above this April 9th high. So you can see here I marked this as the wave one, all right. And then we started breaking out. Now, I told 10 Stock Trader subscribers, I think I mentioned it here on the show, is that we didn't see this typical, usually when we break above that first wave one, it's just an explosive move higher. We didn't see that. However, it still was within the framework of Elliott wave rules, okay? So you can see we were grinding higher and we would test, retest, okay? And then this week we got this gap higher. So that pretty much confirms the wave three for me, okay? We had some triple long ETFs on. We took some profit this week, okay? We still have a lot of positions on there that are benefiting from this rally, okay? It's also important to know that starting tomorrow, May 15th, into let's call it Monday, okay? So a 3-day trading window, if you will, Thursday, Friday, Monday. I have on some of my shorter term time cycle work, that we could be looking at a short term top, okay? That's if we see this top. And what would that have to happen? Obviously, we're rallying into it, okay? So maybe we get a high later this afternoon, or we get a high tomorrow, PPI numbers come out, whatever it might be, and maybe that surprises people. People start taking some profit, and then we, can jump into a corrective move, okay? Now, let me show you the NASDAQ. Let me jump out of this real quick. Now, you can see on the NASDAQ here, on this RSI, that we're getting into overbought levels already. Kind of hard to imagine considering what we just saw, with the volatility, and then boom, all of a sudden we're right back near all-time highs again. It just happened really quick, okay? And with that, we got overbought levels. Now, within strong uptrends, overbought levels can stay overbought for a longer period of time. We also have this divergence here on the composite index, and this is what I love using the composite index, is that you can see that it's starting to make a lower high relative to the RSI making a higher high. Again, this is something that is just warning of weakening momentum. It doesn't mean that we're going to see a crash. It doesn't mean that it's this imminent move. But when I combine this with what I'm looking for in terms of a short-term time cycle, when we look at what's happening with again, the short-term dates, this could say, okay, is this some place where you want to get really, really aggressive? No, I don't think you do. Okay. Um, let's also I looked at the DAX this morning, the German DAX, and this actually hit a new all-time high. Okay, and this was just a huge V-shaped recovery. Okay, we saw the big down move up, and then as you can see here, we just traded above to new all-time highs. Now, similar type situation here in the DAX. Okay, and even though I don't trade European stocks or indexes, I want to see what's happening overseas as it's correlated to what's happening in the U.S. Okay, so we can also see this composite index down at the bottom that's starting to diverge a little bit relative to RSI. We have this new all-time high. Maybe we take a short-term breather. All right. So I want to cover something now. So most people know about divergence, RSI divergence. Maybe you use the MACD or some other momentum indicator. And if you don't, that's okay. I'll show you what that means really quick. But I want to show you one of my favorite technical setups, which is known as a positive RSI reversal. And I'll just use the RSI just to keep things simple, okay? So let's go, we'll do the Dow just to switch it up, all right? And what I want to show you, this is a real quick, educational tutorial lesson, if you will, on divergence, all right? And so basically what you're looking at is, okay, if price makes a new high and the RSI doesn't, that tells you the divergence, okay? So you can kind of see it here. Well, let's get a good example. We can kind of see it. You know what? This isn't going to be. Let's use the semiconductor index. This is going to be better because that is going to be much more volatile. Yeah, so here we go. This is a perfect example of divergence, okay? So this is back in the summer of 2024, okay? So you can see how the RSI made a lower high, okay? But on the same price chart, price made a higher high. This is negative divergence. Now, in this case, you can see it was a huge move down. That's not always going to be the case. It just means that, bulls are weakening and, it's not going to explode higher like you did from this low up to this rally, okay? So that's simple divergence, okay? Now what I want to show you is what's known as an RSI reversal, okay? So reversal is a little bit different. This is where price marks the let me explain this a little bit better. Price is going to mark the setup, and the indicator, in this case the RSI, is going to mark the signal that it's overcompensating. What do I mean by that? Okay, so and we don't have one here yet, but what I would like to see, all right, and let's keep in mind the short-term dates here as well, all right. So let's say we get a top here, heading into tomorrow, maybe into Monday, whatever it might be. Let's say we break out higher, okay, and then we start drifting lower. Now you can see here, and this is I'm back to the S&P chart, okay. Maybe so. Let's hash this out and look exactly how it might look. So let's say we rally into tomorrow, whatever, Monday, okay, and then we just drift lower, or we get a sharp move lower, and let's say we fill this gap at around 57.20, okay? It breaks this short-term support level here in this black, people start freaking out, okay? Now let's say we're just here, and let me highlight this so it's easier to see. Okay, now what'll be important and what I'll be watching for, and I'll be watching for on the S&P, but I'll be watching on numerous other charts, is the RSI, okay, comes down to a level that comes and makes a lower low relative to the price chart, making a higher low. What do I mean by that? Let me show you. Okay, so let's say on this same exact thing, okay, the RSI comes down here. Now, why is this important? This swing low from this wave 2, and let me highlight these just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. Okay, so this dashed line, you can see here near this low, and let me highlight it right here. Okay, so this low on this point in the RSI, okay, if this makes a lower low than that point, while at the same time, the price chart did not make a lower low versus that price. That's where the RSI reversal comes into play. So if you look at it just from sloping up or down, just keep it really simple, right? So this would make a new low in the blue line. I don't know why this keeps doing that. It's all right. So this would make a lower low on the RSI chart, and this, as you can see here, would make a higher low. All right. So what would that mean? This would tell me, okay, that the correction is nearly over. Okay, and now we rally, and it would be a big rally, and likely in a wave 5 or a continuation of the wave 3. We don't know yet, but who cares about that bigger term wave count right now? For me, we're in a strong uptrend. Okay, and you'll have people who are going to want to short the market. All right, this would be a situation where I would say, okay, you know what, this is a great opportunity. You know, and it would probably feel worse than it was, right? You know, down 5%, 7%, whatever it might be. Maybe you have a couple big down days. Maybe SMH or semiconductors are down 10%. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. As long as you see this setup where the RSI is making a lower low compared to price making a higher low, that's the RSI positive reversal. Sometimes you see them on the composite index sooner, all right? That would give me the go-ahead that we're probably going to rally into the summer months, all right? And now you can see here I have these other dates around June 10th, and then we'll call it the last week of June as next dates. So this could simply be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, maybe get a correction, we go again. All right. But in the short term, this is what I'll be looking for to get aggressive with call options. Okay. All right. So that was divergence and RSI. Let me cover Bitcoin now. And so I'm going to use Elliott wave here, but I also want to express that this is a very, very aggressive wave count. I tend to like to have conservative wave counts, but every now and then you get this setup where it's like, wow, this could actually be a very, very significant move in Bitcoin. Okay. Now I'll also cover where we would see this be negated. Okay. And by negated, I mean if Bitcoin crosses below a certain level, then that count is negated. All right. So bear with me for a second. All right. So from the lows in October, September of 2024, all right, you can see here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, simple enough. And then we got this correction with the stock market into April. Okay, so what I have here is this, let's call this the first leg up as a 1, the second leg down as a 2. All right, now if this breaks out, this likely confirms a much larger wave 3 count. That's great. That could, you know, we could probably hit, you know, you can see here I've measured it. It's around 56,000 points, okay, dollars, whatever. All right, you could add that to the bottom of wave 2, around 75,000. So, you know, you could get up to whatever, 125,000, 130,000, whatever it might be. All right, this is where it gets exciting. If this is the first wave up and we get this correction into wave 2, okay, now look what I have labeled here over this recent rally into today. I have another 5 wave count, which looks pretty textbook, if you ask me. And I have this smaller wave 1 up here. Now, let's say we get this correction and it's a little bit steeper than we think. Let's say we get a correction and we still get that RSI positive reversal on the S&P, but instead of it ending soon, it ends, you know, let's say the next time frame, which is, let's say, you know, 2-3 weeks around the 1st of June, or first week of June, June 9th, June 10th, somewhere around there. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really exciting. Let's say Bitcoin has another correction, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right. Let's say it looks something like this. We get a rally, or maybe even we try to break out, but we don't. And then we kind of get something like that. Okay. This would be the low of a second wave 2. So the way to count it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, big 2, smaller 1, smaller 2. Okay, now if this takes off and then we get new highs above what was the all-time high in Bitcoin? 111,000, something like that. That is where you can get a projection of up to 200,000 in Bitcoin. Now, I know that might sound crazy, but I'm just telling you from the structure of Elliott wave, you don't see these. It's basically what's known as a wave 3 of 3. Okay, wave 3s tend to be the biggest. You can see it right here. Okay, this whole move from, after the election into December. Okay, this was a big wave three, clear as day. Okay, again, we could just continue on, and this is the bigger wave three. It's still a great trade. Okay, but if we get this correction that could start tomorrow, and we get another correction, and that holds, let's say the 85,000 level, okay, and then we break above that 110,000, okay, that sets the stage for 200,000. Again, very aggressive, but we have to be always aware of what the bigger setups could be. Doesn't happen all that often. This is a setup that I would trade. Okay. Now, where is this negated? Obviously, if we trade below this wave two low, so let's call it 75,000, 74 and a half. Okay. This wave count is negated. Now, it could still be a bullish setup. Let's say we get a correction and it just, kind of drifts down and then we start rallying. Okay, we could still get that longer term move higher. It just might take longer than we initially thought. However, again, and I want to emphasize, if we get this corrective move over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it holds and then we rally, man, we're off to the races. Okay, and there's one ETF that I'm looking at. This may be a situation where I trade options around it as well, but this is BITX. It's the double Bitcoin ETF. Okay, so this is something that has a decent amount of volume and tracks Bitcoin pretty well. Some of my complaints with some of the Bitcoin things is it hasn't tracked it as good, but this seems to be doing okay. So again, this is a situation, again, you can kind of see 1, 2, and then, if we get a correction here and we rally, the low here was, let's call it 20. The high here was 72, so 50. You add 50. I mean, you're looking at 125 on BITX, if it keeps track with what's happening in Bitcoin. Okay, so from what I'm looking at it, this is the bullish setup both in stocks and Bitcoin. All right, now I mentioned at the start, what's the absolute worst situation that can happen? Again, I don't think this is a probability, but I've received a few questions about it. We talked about it a little bit last week. Paul Tudor Jones talked about, the famous hedge fund trader, talking about, stocks are going to make new lows. Okay. Now, when we think about that, what would be the catalyst for that to happen? The trade situation, the trade deals that were just done on, over the weekend this week that sent the market screaming higher would have to completely reverse. Okay. There would either be some type of war escalation, whether it's India, Pakistan, Ukraine, Russia, something that happened in Israel, who knows, okay? Or inflation just gets so out of control that interest rates spike, and that sends stock tumbling. If it's not one of those three things, then it's some type of black swan. I'm not going to try to predict what that would be because that's just pointless, okay? But again, given the overall market structure, I don't see it as a possibility, but those are, to me, what the catalyst would be. But here's a caveat. Even if that does happen, again, low probability, but even if that does happen, this goes back to what I mentioned, I think one of the earlier starts of the show, is that, we were looking at a possible low in March, and then we get a rally into May 15th, and then we drop into these June, maybe early July dates. So I also have the week of July 4th as important. Okay, so I'll put those up here right now. All right, but essentially what this would look like, it would still be a big correction. So let's say we have some crazy catalyst that sends stocks tumbling. Okay, and we get into one of these time factor lows, whether it's late June, July, whatever it might be. That's a generational buy for me. So even though it would be a painful move, it would still be a setup that you don't get that often, where it would be, the Federal Reserve would probably step in, or, the trade war or whatever it might be would, resolve itself because of the volatility. So I don't know exactly what that would be, but what I do know is that based upon the longer term charts that I've covered before, I'm happy to do that again if you want. That would be a situation where I would be all in. So it's that simple. So regardless of how you spin it, I'm looking to buy. Okay. So that's what I have covered for this week. Let's take some questions if there are any. What is the Bitcoin ETF name again? BITX. Let me pull it up. It's the 2X Bitcoin Strategy ETF. The only thing about it is I think it trades, let me see, I think it trades on the CBOE. So maybe it might be, you might have to check with your broker. Let me just double check just to make sure here. Yeah, CBOE it trades on. You should be able to trade it because you can see here it has 4.3 million that traded today. So plenty of volume there. What are your thoughts about Newegg? Let's check it out. NEGG. Never looked at it. Haven't traded it. Having a nice move over the last couple of days. I just don't like this. To me looks, I just don't like the way that this trades. I'm not saying that you can't make money on it. I can say that about a lot of charts. Okay, I just don't like you have these big spikes and drops, big spikes and drop. You know, is there something here? You can see here this RSI is very, very overbought and you're still within the downtrend. I'm not crazy about that. Do you think we will test the low before taking off higher given the 5:15 Gann date? Yeah, that's what I pretty much just covered in the fact that no, the probabilities say no based upon this Elliott wave count right here. Okay. So now let's say that we get this top into tomorrow, early next week, and it becomes quite violent. Maybe we get that catalyst and it's just like, all right, something bad is happening here. Okay. Where, you know, support is broken very, very quickly. Okay. That's something where I mentioned it last week where I would try, and I don't usually do this, but I would trade within the VIX sectors, the VIX instrument, UVXY, probably buy calls on that. Okay. Maybe that's even something that we can do heading into Friday or Monday. Just given the maybe we see this corrective move and we can just have it on. Okay. But as right now, the probabilities tell me that it's not high, that, you know, we'll retest the lows. But again, you know, I like to cover my bases and say, hey, this is still a possibility, even though what we're seeing, you know, especially this week and what I'm seeing in the, you know, on the wave counts everywhere is telling me that the correction is over and we're in this new bull market. What's your thoughts right now on Tesla? I covered Tesla on the weekly market outlook and we're actually starting to, I think it's on this chart. Let's see. Yeah. We're starting to break out a little bit. And I believe I mentioned it last week. We went back and looked, you know, at different instances. You can see here in late May late May of last year, you know, we had this breakout rally and then it kind of drifted, but we rallied again. You know, if we go back to 2023, you know, a significant low was made in late April. Early May, or mid-May. You can see here that we're breaking this downtrend. Okay, is this a situation? You know, we can see. All right, let's look at like the worst case, right? And let's say that was something that was bad. You know, maybe this is a corrective. I just don't see these as corrective moves. Okay, so this to me is something where it, you know, started the first wave up. You know, we're getting into overbought levels here on the RSI. You know, once again, maybe we pull back and now we're starting a new uptrend like this, okay? And we can pull back and support and buy calls. Or at least maybe just buy the stock with a low risk stop below this double low, double bottom at 217. NVIDIA, yeah, NVIDIA is doing the same thing. I actually have this wave count that I was working on this morning, okay? And, you know, NVIDIA has been in a range, so to speak, really since June of last year, so nearly a year, okay? Hasn't done much, didn't break out, didn't break down. To me, this is very corrective. All right, you can see here we're breaking out above this downtrend. You can see my wave counts on here, even though they're kind of small. Okay, 1, 2, maybe this is all very short term. We trade down, you know, and NVIDIA reports earnings on the 28th, I believe. At least that's what it was as of last week, okay? So maybe that's a catalyst for people to take off earnings, you know, and then they report decent results and they rally. Now maybe NVIDIA is the catalyst that doesn't, and you know, we get a bigger correction. Maybe that lasts into June. Okay, as long as it doesn't break support, all of these other stocks, then the worst case scenario to me doesn't take place, and all that does is give us an opportunity to buy. Can you immediately tell when a wave one is starting, or do you need to see wave two to realize the new pattern has begun? Excellent question. That's where Elliott wave becomes subjective, and that's where you get a lot of criticism from it. This is where also we're understanding the rules, and quite honestly, having experience about what to look for. Okay, this April 7th to April 9th move to me was like, okay, that's about as clear as it gets, right? You have this huge move off of a low, okay? You're vastly oversold, okay? And then you get this corrective move lower that doesn't break this low. So a good way to think about it is, okay, I think this is a wave one, so I'm gonna label this a wave one. If we get down here, but we don't break this low, then yeah, this is probably a wave two, all right? This is a low risk opportunity. We bought IWM calls here. We were trading Russell 2000, okay? But that was all based upon this wave two, okay? And so now if you get down below this wave one low and that breaks, you're wrong. So you have to go back to the drawing board. And that's gonna happen. That's just gonna happen. But I mentioned this numerous times that the great thing about it is that it's a risk management system and a trading system, okay? It'll tell you, okay, I think this is a wave two. My risk management says if it drops below this level, that's not only my stop, it tells me that my wave count's wrong, so I got to get out, let the market do what it's going to do, and then see what else is happening. So that's a great question. That's how you go about, trying to figure out which wave is which is based upon the rules. And if it breaks those rules, you have to, stop the labeling and then start again. Can you take a look at LOAR? Sure, LOAR, Loar Holdings. So let's look at this. It doesn't look like this has been trading for very long. Without a whole lot of trading history, obviously it's trading down while the rest of the market, for the most part, has been trading up. So, let's call this a double top. Here's a great Elliott wave example. All right, let's look at this, and you can kind of see it already without even me labeling it. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe we get a corrective move. So let me label it for you. This is exactly what I would do if I was on my own. So it's a good thing that you asked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe this is an A, B, C. Okay, and then you break out again. Now, where would you be wrong? Let's go back to the gentleman or lady's first question, is that if it starts breaking below here, then you're wrong. But if it starts breaking out, you probably are looking at a wave three move. Would skyrocketing Bitcoin prices pull other popular crypto along for the ride? Ethereum. I would think so. That's probably a question for Eric Wade, but just upon, based upon the, correlation that we've seen for most of the time, Bitcoin tends to, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't trade any altcoins, I look at Ethereum and that's pretty much about it, or Ripple of late, but I don't even really look at that. It's really, for me, just Bitcoin and Ethereum. So it absolutely, you get a move from 100,000 to 200,000 in Bitcoin, I would imagine it pulls the other with it. What exactly is a triangle in the Elliott wave theory? A triangle is usually just an ABC corrective move. And I tell 10 stock trader subscribers all the time, I don't get too caught up with, labeling the patterns. I'll call out a head and shoulders pattern, or, a wedge pattern. My favorites are leading and ending diagonals within the structure of Elliott wave, but using this as an example, you could get something, that looks like, that looks sort of like that. That's not the best example, but where you're just kind of consolidating within this move, and then it either breaks out or breaks down. But usually when you see a triangle, it's some type of corrective pattern within the structure of Elliott wave. What is your thought on oil, USO? I mentioned this last week or the week before that. I don't tend to trade oil. My contention is that you're trading against a cartel, and they have they have inside information before any majority of the market knows it. They've always had it. They're always going to use it. Okay, you can see here for 2 years, 2+ years, it's just gone sideways. Now you can trade the extremes, but for me, I'm going to look at it as a gauge as to inflation, which is obviously important. Okay, what's happening overseas with war? Is oil spiking? Supply and demand. Is oil rallying for growth? Is it declining not because of growth, or is it the opposite? A lot of supply, everything's good. People are traveling, and that's good for the economy. So there's multiple ways to look at it, but as you can see here, I stay away from it because right now it's just been trendless. So it's just not something that I trade. Thoughts on gold? Yeah, we looked at gold over the last couple of weeks, and the big move up was based upon uncertainty. Okay, so as you can see here, we were trading within this range or this nice technical channel. Okay. Now the crazy thing about what was happening with gold is that silver wasn't keeping up, the gold miners weren't keeping up. Okay, and now we're correcting again. Now here's something that I find interesting. Okay, and this is very close, very close. Actually, it's almost there in creating a positive RSI reversal. Let's take a look at it, okay? So this is something that we could absolutely trade, but what I want to show you, and this is what I was looking at in the S&P, okay? And maybe this goes hand in hand. Maybe what we're looking at, maybe what May 15th is all about, or, May 15th, next few days, okay, is a return to uncertainty. Now, what's that going to be? I have no idea, but what I'm saying here is that we can see here that gold on price on the same two levels, RSI has made a lower low and just barely, but you guys, hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, this is sloping down. Let me highlight it here. This is sloping down on the price. It's actually sloping up. Okay, so let's say we head into tomorrow and we get one more dip lower in gold and we get another rip higher in stocks. This could be a situation where we can start trading gold. Okay, so I would want to see a little bit more of this this RSI just come down a little bit more. We could also look at this possible symmetrical move in gold that would target around this uptrend of support. It's a pretty good technical setup. Okay, something I'll be keeping an eye on tomorrow. Certainly over the next couple of days. Okay, this could definitely be something that we could trade. Palantir, please. Let's see here. So this is a debated stock. Some people don't know what they do. They're in the defense industry. But let's check out this because this is kind of interesting. Okay. Let's look at I'm just going to highlight the May 15th date. And this is me just looking at it, okay, just from an Elliott Wave perspective. And let's see what we got here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at that, okay? Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and buy puts here. I'm not recommending anything. I'm just saying, okay, we can also look down here. We can see the divergence on the RSI. We can see divergence on the composite index. But look what happened with price. Price made a new high. So we have divergence on the RSI and the CI or composite index. Okay, we have what looks to be a 5-wave count. Maybe it trades a little bit higher into Thursday, Friday, possibly Monday. But this would be a situation where we would likely see some type of pullback. Now, do you want to get crazy with puts here? You're trading within an uptrend. Again, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that's something that you have to keep in mind. At a minimum, maybe a short-term trade. Thoughts on ALAB? ALAB. So first thing that jumps out to me in a short-term downtrend here, and look at the RSI is very, very overbought. Okay, that's the first thing that jumps out, and this is similar to that LOAR, just not a whole lot of trading. Okay, I would want to see, and there's not. This was a little bit of a steeper correction than I would have liked to see off of this big rally. So, we might have to do, or might need a little bit more price history, a little more price action going forward to really, for me, to make a decision one way or the other. Looks like those are all the questions for this week. So, we'll, right now, as it stands, we have the volatility possibly over the next couple of days. We'll take a look at gold, okay? We'll see what happens with Bitcoin. There could be a possible big move there, all right? But plenty of things to focus on. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.